Ethan, I just need to give you some feedback about something. Is that all right? Is this a good time?
Yeah, I guess this is a good time.
Well, I'm not really gonna, but how did that feel? I mean, just monitor what your stomach, your heart, your head, when I said, hey, Ethan, I need to give you some feedback. What did you feel inside just for that first split second?
Honestly, that kind of tightness in the abdomen area, like the same feeling you get when you wake up in the morning and you realize that you have a whole bunch of things you need to do.
Yeah.
It's the same feeling kind of in the gut.
And you didn't know that question was coming. We didn't play this ahead of time, right? That was spontaneous. That's how you felt right there in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's called fear, dude.
Okay. This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I mean, I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Hey, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Man Gene with Mind and Heart podcast. You have Ethan and Michael Nash here, your two hosts.
How you doing, everybody?
You know what? I'll tell you how I'm doing. I felt a little weird after that intro.
Little fear there, huh?
Yeah. I didn't know you were going to say that, and immediately, even though I knew we were recording, I had kind of that weird kind of tightening up of my abdomen feeling that I get on when I'm having like a stressful day or something's not going well in the moment. So where were you going with that? First off, do you actually have feedback for me?
I don't.
Should we turn the mics off?
I'm really good. Okay. Things are good. We're staying pretty current, I think, between us back and forth, and I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. So do I. I feel like we have the ability to give each other feedback that works, and it seems to stick. And although we may have disagreements around it, we get through them.
Yeah, and it's super helpful for our relationship as father and son. It's been helpful for our work relationship. It needs to be part of any healthy relationship.
I agree. And regardless of our healthy relationship that we both agree that we have, when you say you need to give me feedback, I still felt this cringe of what I would imagine to be fear.
Yeah, and you know what's weird about that is that, we talked about the power differential in one of our recent podcasts, and some of what you felt we can attribute to that, right? You know that in this, the hats we're wearing here, not only are we father-son, but more importantly at this point, in this moment, it's the employer-employee power differential that might have poked you a little bit, right? My boss wants to give me feedback. What does that mean? You had some fear. However, when you give me feedback, Ethan, when you say to me, I have some feedback for you or something similar to that, I get the exact same tightening in my stomach, right? And there's not the same power differential.
Really?
Right?
So
yeah.
if I say, hey, Dad, I need to give you some feedback about something that's been going on with work.
Yep.
You're going to feel fear as well.
Yeah, and
the power differential doesn't matter there. By the way, folks, power differential, I believe that's episode 2. Check it out. One of the first few episodes anyways.
Yeah, that was a good one. I enjoyed that conversation. Here's what's going on, dude. All of us, down deep, we have a need to be liked. We have a need to be competent. We have a need to be on good terms with somebody. We have a need to feel good about ourselves. And when somebody is about to say something that is a criticism, or I wish you would have done this different, I wish you were doing this better, or you're having a negative impact on me, there is an immediate threat. And what's really interesting about that is that information that we take in, the words that we hear, they enter our system through our senses, and they go on a fast track right to our amygdala before they hit our prefrontal cortex, right? So your amygdala actually processed what I said to you before any other part of your brain processed it. And what your amygdala is scanning for at that moment Remember? Danger.
Yeah.
Danger, 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 danger. So what
Stranger danger, stranger danger.
What you're feeling right there in that just the first microseconds is fear. And we fear shows up in our systems as worry, as anxiety, as defensiveness, as straight out fear, as terror, as, lots of different things. But in that moment, what your amygdala was experiencing was the exact same kind of fear that you would have been feeling. We talked about this before. If you were in a dark alley and there was some footsteps coming up behind you, your amygdala is feeling the exact same thing. The exact same part of your amygdala is going through the exact same routine as it would go through if you were feeling fear of your physical danger.
Right. Your amygdala doesn't differentiate between physical or social danger, right? That's the filter through your amygdala before your brain kind of decides what type of danger this is.
Right. So the fast track to your amygdala, that happens first. So your body experiences the fear first. Then the information gets up to your prefrontal cortex, where that part of your brain can do some sorting and introduce some logic. So that's why as you're, walking down the path on your hike and out of the corner of your eye, you see a snake. And you immediately, your heart beats faster and your stomach tightens up and your body reacts, your muscles contract, you jump away, and then you go, oh, it's a stick.
Right.
Okay, your prefrontal cortex clicked in there and said, oh, okay, calm down, amygdala, relax. Now, of course, why is that true? Why did we evolve that way? Well, as humans, right, we had no time to stop and analyze the situation. We had to have a mechanism that caused us to immediately either fight back or run away.
Right, exactly. And I think what you're describing there is, and I might get these backwards here, but there's either a type 1 error or a type 2 error, right? And our brains are really good at making the type 1 error, which is, oh, shoot, it's a snake. Let's get out of here. Oh, no, that was just a blade of grass, a long blade of grass. Right? All right, that's an okay reaction. But, our ancestors that made the type 2 error, which was...
Oh, it's not a snake. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's probably just a blade of grass. Okay, they're dead now. So they're actually not your ancestors.
Yeah, they didn't have time to go home and make babies and pass on those genes.
So our default mode for our brain is to assume that something's dangerous about the situation.
Yes.
Right?
Our brains have evolved to look for danger actually quicker and more often than looking for good things.
This is one of the first parts of the brain, though, that started developing, which is just the ability to recognize danger or safety.
Yeah, it's part of the mammalian brain, right? It's the part of the brain that we developed as we evolved to recognize danger. This is the part. Well, one of the parts of our brains, as we've said before, that really kept us going and kept us alive, because those type 1 errors you're talking about, we can make those all day, and it's not going to kill us.
Right.
It just makes us a little more skittish.
Right.
Well, skittish, right? That's good in a sense. I mean, evolutionary speaking, those of us who knew to run or jump or fight immediately before we had time to process, we're certainly much more likely to survive.
Right. Okay. Good. Well, I'm glad you're here to kind of explain that to me.
Yeah, and this relates to, feedback. We've been talking about adaptive skills.
Yes, we have. We've been talking about adaptive skills, and let's just kind of do a really, really quick review of what we've discussed with adaptive skills so far. We've done 2 separate episodes on them. In the first episode we did on adaptive skills, basically we just talked about what are adaptive skills. And adaptive skills are these, what I've called the periodic table of skills, or these are the skills that come with you from childhood, and they make or break your success as an adult. These are skills like being able to listen so the other person feels respected, right? This is the ability to give feedback in a way that gets through someone's defensiveness and works and sticks. The ability to receive feedback non-defensively. The ability.
In fact, let me interrupt you, which is not a good adaptive skill, as we talked about last time. Those 3 that you just mentioned right there, those are perfect, right? Listening so the other person feels heard, receiving feedback non-defensively, giving feedback in a way that maintains relationship but still tells your truth. I'm glad you started with those 3, because I do think of those 3 as sort of the trifecta I mean, there's dozens of adaptive skills that I would want every manager to be working on, but those three right there are absolutely essential for being a good manager.
Right. If you can master, or not even master, but just get pretty good at listening so the other person feels respected. And here, we'll tell you why. We'll tell you why listening matters. All right. So they did this study where they took teenagers and they had them have conversations one-on-one with some adults. All right. So one group, they had this conversation with adults, but these adults were practicing a very specific set of listening skills. In fact, they're the listening skills that we talked about last episode. Now, this another group of adults that were having a one-on-one conversation with teenagers basically had the exact same conversation in terms of content, but they weren't practicing those listening skills. Now, in the first group where those adults were practicing those listening skills, the teenagers reported out, these adults cared about me.
Yeah, the kids were asked later about the adult they talked to, and it was just that group, those kids, who said, that person cared about me. And there was nothing in the conversation that would have indicated caring at all. Mm-hmm. But they felt cared about because they were listened to in a way that made them feel heard. And what that tells us is listening feels like caring. And that's, along with what you're saying here, Ethan, why does a manager need to know how to listen well? Because part of being a good manager, part of being a good leader is being able to show your people that you have their best interests at heart, that you care about them. And there's really not a better way of doing that than by consistently practicing those kinds of listening skills.
Right.
So the other two, receiving feedback non-defensively, right? I've got to have that as a manager. That's really important for a manager, because if I get up the guts to give you feedback and you get defensive, you've become unapproachable, right? I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to give you feedback. I'm not going to give you information. You become an ineffective manager because you're not approachable. And then the third one, giving feedback in a way that tells your truth, but also maintains a relationship. If you're giving me feedback as my boss, I am going to feel defensive. So you got to give me feedback in a way that lowers those defenses. So that's why I really do believe that those three adaptive skills are there's a lot of other important ones, but those three really, really count.
And I would agree with you. If you need to focus in on any three adaptive skills, those are going to be the ones. So we talked about these adaptive skills, what they are. We talked about why they matter. And then last episode, we broke down, well, for one, before we even broke down kind of the process of growing and developing your skills, we really talked a lot about the idea that mental training and adults' ability to change their brains late into life is a real thing. That's a real thing, folks.
It's really encouraging.
It's called, whatever you want to call it. There's different, there's the neuroplasticity. There's neurogenesis. I mean, basically the brain's ability to generate new neurons late in the life. Now, speaking of that, I was just going to read this quote that I found that I thought really frames the idea of mental training well. This quote is by neuroscientist and philosopher Sam Harris. And he spent basically his life studying the brain and understanding consciousness. And here's the quote. "The concept of mental training is barely entertained, but there really are things we can do that leads to cognitive and emotional and even ethical changes that are wholly good for us. So it seems to me that we need a new norm of human growth, where it's understood that growth is possible and even necessary continuously throughout life, intellectually, in our relationships, in the way we prioritize the use of our attention." This is to say is that, like physical training, our brains can change as well. And throughout our life, if we put focus on that, it can lead to profound changes in the way that we interact with the world and interact in our relationships. And I think that's a key point to hold on to there. And so we talked a lot about that, mental training, and that's what we're talking about with developing adaptive skills. We're talking about actually working the most complicated muscle in your head, or in your brain, or in your body,
right?
The brain, right? So we talked about that.
Well, and with that, we talked about the path to get there, right? Breaking that down even further, there's the internal work. Mm-hmm. So when we were talking about listening, we were talking about, for example, about focusing. We were talking about empathy, things you do in your head, things you do with your attitudes, your beliefs, your mindset. you're working on the internal stuff at the exact same time you're working on the external stuff. And in that case, it was these 8 different behavioral components to listening.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you put those 2 together, you practice that over and over and over again, your brain starts changing, your neural pathways grow. It really does make a difference. And I sound like a broken record, but I want to go back and say this again. Managers, leaders, guys out there, you folks out there that are leaders, that specific skill that we talked about last time, please practice it. Only 30% of the population naturally does those things.
Mm-hmm.
So do the math.
And 90% of people think they're in the 30%.
That's exactly right.
I just made that up, but
that's probably true.
That's based off my case studies.
Yes.
So we talked about the path to growing these adaptive skills. You got to look internally. You got to look externally. You got to do them both together. Mm-hmm. If you just do one, it's not going to be sustainable.
Right.
Right? It really won't. So now what I think we should do is take another one of these adaptive skills that we've been blabbering on about, put it through the process. Let's break down its component parts so we can practice them on an external level, and then also talk about what is the internal work we need to do to grow and develop in these adaptive skills and change our brains.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about receiving feedback non-defensively, since we've already hit on that quite a few times over the last few episodes.
Yeah, we've talked about it here and there, but you're right, let's dig in on this one, because again, everyone that's in a leadership role, anytime you have a power differential, you've got to be the kind of person that feels safe for the other people to give feedback to, and even beyond the power differential, right? I want my wife and I want Christy and I to be able to give each other feedback without having to do a whole lot of second guessing. And is he going to be open? Is he going to be upset? You know, if you and I can't give each other feedback, the other one of us is going to be editing and second guessing, and we're not going to be authentic. We're not going to be open. We've got to learn this one.
And I agree. In fact, I couldn't agree more. And maybe just real quick, I know we've harped on this a bit, but what happens when you can't receive feedback non-defensively? I mean, some pretty ugly things. What I always tell people, and what I believe is true for me, is that if I'm not able to receive feedback in a non-defensive manner, people will not come to me and tell me the truth that I need to hear. And when I can't hear the truth, that impedes my ability to grow and develop myself, because I can't get feedback. And feedback is a gift that allows me to have some areas of growth to work on.
Yeah. And let's get some other consequences. So the one you just mentioned, I think, is the most important one. If I'm not open to feedback, people won't give me feedback, and therefore I don't get a chance to grow, right? Another, I guess, a consequence of being not open to feedback or showing up defensively is it literally impacts the trust and respect between us, right? If you're in a relationship with me, but you know there's certain things you can't say to me, right? That's actually going to start to impact your trust of me. It's going to impact your respect of me. It actually degrades our relationship.
Right. And even at a deeper level, once you start realizing that people are not able to give you feedback, you start to think to yourself, shoot, well, what do they really think about me? And what is their true opinion on me?
Yeah, so you start to second guess and doubt.
You start to second guess and doubt, and all that stuff. So anyways, we need to be able to do that. Receive feedback non-defensively. So do you want to start talking about the internal work to do?
Yeah.
So let's start there. So again, we need to work on things internally to actually become less defensive.
Yeah, and I've got I guess I want to mention 4 things that I think we could be doing internally throughout the span of our lifetime to begin to kind of maybe sand off some of those rough edges of defensiveness that we feel, right? So right now we're not talking about how we show up. We're talking about that internal amygdala overload feel, right? What are some things we can do to tamp that down a little bit? And I'm going to start with self-compassion on this one, because, and I mean self-compassion in a couple different ways. When I start to feel the defensiveness, I got to tell myself that's human. There's nothing wrong with me because I am feeling that defensiveness. The person's going to give me feedback. I notice that tightening in my stomach. What's happening there is stuff I can't even control. My amygdala grabbed onto this threat basically that was coming at me, and it flooded me with that sense of fear. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so the first thing I'm going to do is experience that fear or that what feels like defensiveness, and I'm going to give myself grace.
Because I think there's another component to self-compassion, which is when someone says, hey, I need to give you feedback, and say that feedback is not the most flattering feedback.
Right.
The self-compassion piece is, I have to remember I have many other wonderful qualities about me.
Right.
They're going to give me feedback on something that they would like to change that they don't necessarily like. It's going to be hard to hear, but I can have self-compassion and remember, all right, I have many other qualities about me.
I'm a good guy.
This might not be one of them, but that's okay.
Right.
We're not all perfect.
That's exactly right. As opposed to going into, as opposed to going into that other mode where we think, oh no, see, I already thought I was a bad guy and this just proves it. See, here's another terrible thing about me. I mean, as soon as you start spiraling into that, beating yourself up and that self-condemnation, you aren't going to be able to learn and grow and develop at that moment. So yeah, self-compassion. Not only is it okay to feel defensive, it's okay not to be perfect. Give myself grace.
Right. By the way, this is a component of cognitive behavioral therapy. I just wanted to throw that in there. The ability to give yourself self-compassion and remember you have many other worth and other great qualities about you. And, yeah, I just want to throw that in there. So outside of self-compassion, as far as the internal piece goes, what else can we work on internally?
Well, 3 more things. Number 2, I would say I'm going to call this differentiation. And we talked a little bit about this last time, but this is the ability to hear that feedback and get some distance between you and the feedback. It's the part of you that says, this is just information. This feedback doesn't define me. I don't have to own it. If I ultimately decide I don't agree with this, that's perfectly okay. Think of it as keeping some distance between you and that feedback, almost so you can actually see it more clearly. It's not too close. You don't have to defend against it right away because you can remind yourself, this is just data.
So it's just information. I can do whatever I want to do with it.
Absolutely.
So just receive it like data. So this is a very Spock-like approach, huh?
It is. It's like you're a scientist, and there's some data right there, and you're gonna get some distance from it emotionally. Even you're gonna look at it as it's the other person's experience, it's the other person's opinion. So that gives you permission to look at it without it feeling threatening.
It's subjective information, is what you're saying. It's
objective.
It's subjective information.
It's the other person's subjective experience. So that's what you're saying, right?
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Right. It's the other person's experience. It's not absolutely true. It's not absolutely false. Let's just look at it, right? So get some distance. Don't soak it in. Don't let it define you, right? Now the third thing goes right along with that second thing, but it sounds like a contradiction almost. It sounds like it's opposite, because now this third thing is look for some truth in it, right? Be open, be curious, look for what's true about this. It's really the description of, am I actually going to be open to feedback? Because if I do too much differentiation all by itself, keeping distance, that can translate eventually into nothing sticks.
I see.
Right? I'm Teflon. I'm just going to examine it and I'm going to count it wrong every single time.
Yeah, that makes sense. If that's that's the only internal piece that you take is this feedback's only information,
right?
Then you may walk around saying, yeah, give me your feedback, but I'm not listening to it because your information is wrong.
It's always wrong.
Buster.
It's always wrong. Exactly. So differentiation says I'm going to get some distance so I can, not get, totally covered by it, so I don't get soaked into it. But this piece, curiosity, openness, this is where I'm looking at it because I have some distance. I can look at it and say, oh, well, that piece right there could be true. Oh, and that other thing he said, I can see why I did have this negative impact on him last night when I said that. That makes sense.
Right.
So I'm looking for truth. I'm looking for nuggets of truth.
Well, this really is looking at it like you're a scientist. A scientist is going to look at data and they recognize this is only data, but I need to be curious about this data and open to this data if I'm going to extrapolate anything from it.
Yeah, and the hard part about this, of course, is that even though we're doing sort of the scientific look at it, this really does relate to me. There's something in there that's going to be about me, and it's going to be really tempting for me to find reasons subconsciously to not own it.
Right.
So I want to, at the same time I'm saying this is just information, I also want to be looking for things that I can own. Which pieces here really do fit?
Okay, well hold on a second, because I think that we've all probably received feedback before that no matter which way we look at it or however we spin it, we just can't find truth from that feedback. So you're not saying that we have to look at feedback and say, well, I need to find something in this that's true that I can then change.
Yeah, I think that'd be a little bit getting ahead of yourself. I don't think that these moments of curiosity and openness are about arriving at a conclusion. I think it's literally just keep that openness open. Like be looking for truth. You may not discover the truth during that conversation. You might discover it later tonight when you're laying in bed thinking about it.
Okay.
You might discover it the next day. You might discover it 6 months later when someone else gives you the exact same feedback. But I'm encouraging us to maintain that channel of openness and curiosity during this conversation, which is one way of saying don't discard things out of hand.
Right. So is it almost safe to say that with this whole differentiation piece plus being curious and open to the information that you almost go into feedback assuming that person has something to tell you that you don't know?
That's really good. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I would say yes. I would say when Christy says to me, hey, honey, I need to give you some feedback, and she's referring to maybe something that happened yesterday or something I said last night, it's going to be a lot more, it's going to be a healthier conversation if I go into that saying to myself, I generally respect her. I trust her. So it's super likely that something she has to say is valid.
Yeah.
I think that's great. That's openness right there, right? So we have 3 things so far out of our 4. We have self-compassion. We have the idea of being separate from the feedback, differentiation, getting some distance, right? And then number 3, we have being open, being curious, looking for nuggets of truth. And then lastly, I would say, and this is kind of a really practical piece, the other thing you're doing in your head, the other person can't see this, is you're practicing a whole bunch of self-control. Because when we bridge now into the physical behaviors, the actual outward stuff, a lot of it's going to have to do with not saying that thing you feel like saying right now, not putting that look on your face, not rolling your eyes, not arguing back, right? So a lot of what you're going to be doing internally is going to be this sort of pulling back and exercising self-control.
So you're with the self-control piece, though, is that kind of saying that you practice all this internal work, but the defensiveness is still going to show up, so you need to hold it back? So you're not truly getting rid of the defensiveness. It's still going to be there.
Yes. In fact, this goes back to self-compassion for me, right? So I'm going to practice all these internal things, and damn it, I'm still going to feel defensive, and I'm going to feel like a failure. And I got to tell myself, the reason I feel defensive is because I'm a human being. It's because I have an amygdala. So what I'm doing when I'm practicing these internal processes, I'm just maybe learning a little bit at a time how to sand off some of those rough edges of the feeling of defensiveness. But you know what? It's pretty unlikely that feeling is going to ever totally go away. So the self-control part is, yeah, I'm still feeling some defensiveness, so don't behave defensively. Don't show that particular physical behavior. We'll get to those in a minute. But the self-control is don't do that thing.
That makes sense. And what you're saying is, you're continuing to practice this internal work with the external work, which we'll go over in a minute.
Yep.
And you can literally start feeling less defensive, right?
Over time.
Over time.
Yep.
So over time, that fourth one, that self-control, is a more of a automatic response.
Yeah, and though I would probably say that for the rest of my life, I will probably feel some of that defensiveness, so there will always be some need for me to hold back and be careful. That's all I'm saying. Just be careful when you're listening to someone who's giving you feedback.
Right.
And because here's the thing, if I don't practice that, if I forget to practice self-control and it starts to leak out of me that I'm feeling defensive, like you start seeing the defensiveness, the message to you is going to be, don't give this guy feedback.
Right. That makes sense. So all this stuff is really about trying to change the way we see feedback.
The way we experience it.
The way we experience it.
Right. How it feels inside.
And it's going to be a lot less likely you're going to get defensive when you're working on these, really 4 internal pieces.
Yeah. In fact, I would say, and this is kind of a dumb way of saying it, but I'm going to say it anyways, if I'm feeling defensiveness usually on a 1 through 10 scale, if I tend to feel defensiveness at a 6 to 10, let's say, range.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, I can probably bring that down to a 2 to 5 range, maybe. Right? I'm
Pretty good.
Yeah, and I'm doubtful. I'm a cynic that we could get to the point where we're just never. I shouldn't say that. I mean, there are some super self-actualized people who just have got to the point maybe where they really are so non-defended they don't feel defensiveness. I bow to those people.
The Dalai Lama.
There you go.
Right. Or we just wait till we get those kind of that neuro chip.
There you go.
Neuralink implanted in our brain that just, we're just superhuman. Anyways, I digress. So there's your own internal work right there. And by the way, we're not suggesting that it's simple or quick.
Oh, no.
That's a life journey right there. But I hope you get why this is important, right? As a human being, as a spouse, as a partner, as a friend, man, the message of openness and non-defensiveness, that's what makes you approachable. That's what builds trust and respect. And I know I'm being repetitive, but this is important, folks. This is what allows you to hear the truth, and that's how you grow.
And it allows you to have these beautiful relationships where there's this authenticity and people can get their needs met and they can tell you what they really need to tell you. It builds bonds.
Imagine a workplace where everybody can go around and give each other feedback without this weird tension in the air of always having to test the waters, right? Fill it out. Imagine a workplace where that's just the norm. Open feedback, people are able to give it and receive it well. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
But I think that needs to start with you as the leader. Or really whoever you are that's listening to this.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And again, when a leader shows non-defensiveness, it is amazingly refreshing. It builds trust in that relationship. People feel safer. It tends to mitigate that power differential a little bit or a lot. It's vital because, again, the opposite is true. When a manager or a leader shows defensiveness, so many doors slam shut.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move into some of the physical piece now, right?
So the external work,
external behaviors. What would I be doing on the outside? And this is going to be really redundant, but I'm going to say this again, probably for the 5th time in the last 6 podcasts. I would say you should show up non-defensively even while you're feeling defensive. And you can, which is the good news. And you said this really well last time. We were talking about listening, and you said, can you listen to somebody that you don't really want to listen to? And can you listen to someone well that you don't really respect? The answer is yes. And you absolutely can and should listen non-defensively while you're feeling the defensiveness inside. Don't wait until you stop feeling defensive to start being non-defensive.
Or it will never happen.
It'll never happen. Exactly right.
So the external work, let's break this down. So we are going to act as if we're not feeling defensive. And by the way, that's not being phony. As you said last episode, that's an adult social skill called self-control.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So what are the component parts of showing up non-defensively when receiving feedback?
Well, last time when we talked about listening, we gave 8 different component parts, and they were sort of listed randomly. There's not a particular order. This time there's an order. There's 5 things, and I really encourage people to list these or to think of these in this order. I encourage people to have these 5 things in your brain. And by the way, folks, anyone out there who wants to show up less defensively, which I hope is all of you, please commit these 5 things to memory, because when someone gives you feedback, you don't get to say, oh, hold on, let me go get my notes. You've got to be ready right at that moment to receive feedback. So I would really...
That was one time, by the way. I learned after that.
Yeah, please don't do that, Ethan. First thing you're going to do when you receive feedback, and this sounds like a really broad category, but I'll break it down for you. But the first thing you're going to do is literally called listen. And we talked about listening last time, but I'm going to be much more specific right now. When somebody is giving me feedback, and by the way, we're talking, of course, about challenging feedback, negative feedback, corrective feedback. We're not talking about positive feedback today. Side note, we will talk about positive feedback. I promise. We will spend some time on that at a later date. The first thing you're going to do when someone is giving you feedback is just go into a mode that looks like listening, right? So 2 pieces to this, 2 subheadings. Number 1, shut up.
Shut your damn mouth.
Exactly. Just be quiet, because right here is where defensiveness almost always starts. It's within the first 5-10 seconds.
I wouldn't have done that if you just...
Exactly. That wasn't my fault. It was...
Wait, let me explain.
You don't know all the details. You don't know what really happened.
Let me tell you the whole story.
Exactly. Shut up. just, Ethan, shut up right now. Just shh.
You're scaring me.
No, this as soon as feedback comes at us, we have this part of us, and again, I don't need to go back into the amygdala, but yeah, there's a part of us that immediately wants to feel safe. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to defend yourself, right? When you start explaining, when you start adding information, when you start saying you don't really know the whole story, the way the other person will experience that until they feel heard and respected, that's going to look like defensiveness. So here's the bottom line. As soon as you start, I take that back. If you start pushing back before the other person feels heard, that looks like defensiveness.
That totally makes sense.
So the first thing you do is just shut your mouth, but that has to go with the second part of this, which is you also have to look like you're listening. Your body language has to show that you're open. So standing there not speaking, but rolling your eyes, you're still pushing back before the person feels heard. You're just doing it non-verbally, right? So you have to look open, which means the body language we talked about last time, maybe a little bit of head nodding, some good eye contact, an open look on your face, not crossing your arms, not shaking your head, or rolling your eyes. Basically what we're saying here is, and I think this is the hardest part, you're hearing some feedback. Let's say you don't like what you're hearing. You're feeling some defensiveness. The hardest thing at that moment is to practice self-control and just shut your mouth and look open.
All right. I think we got that one.
Yeah. And then
we're going to shut up because, again, defensiveness isn't about whether it feels right or wrong. Mm-hmm. It's when you start pushing back, you start correcting, you start explaining, you need to shut up.
Yes. If they haven't really been able to explain themselves yet, you're going to look defensive.
Fair enough. So, Number two. We're ready for that?
Yeah.
Which is, I believe, what is number two?
I have to ask questions. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget this group of employees. I was leading a staff meeting with this group. These folks worked for me. We finish up the meeting. Everyone's filing out of the room. And this one guy turns to me before he leaves the room and he says, "Mike, I just hate the way you run staff meetings." And he walked out of the room.
Nice, dude.
Yeah, I literally can't do anything about that feedback because I don't even know what he's talking about. Right. So I went out in the hallway, fired him, and just kidding. Did not fire.
Kidding, folks.
I went out to the hallway and I asked him, I said, "Hey, can you give me some ideas? What would you like to see more of or less of in staff meetings?" So I asked this question. Now, when you ask a question, you have the opportunity to have a couple cool things happen. Number one, you get information, right? So by asking that question, and he actually had some really good things to say. So he said some things that gave me some information. I wouldn't have had that information if I hadn't asked the question. But I think more importantly, Ethan, what did I communicate to him by saying to him, "Hey, can you give me some thoughts on staff meetings?"
Well, you communicate that you actually care and this matters to you and that you're open to this.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's this, to me the coolest thing about asking a question after you've listened for a little while is you're saying to the other person, "This is really safe." And in fact, how much more can I show you that I'm open than I'm laying myself out there? I'm actually asking for more.
Right. How much more can you show that you're open than asking for more feedback when someone is, in this case, attempting to give you feedback?
Yeah. My question was designed to get information, but also to show that I'm open. Now, of course, the way I ask it, the tone of voice I use, very important. Because if I would have said, "What do you mean? What's wrong with my staff meetings?"
Right.
Okay, now that is a question. Technically, there is a question mark at the end of that.
Yeah, it's an accusatory question.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's prosecutorial.
Prosecutorial.
At that point, I'm challenging his feedback as opposed to telling him that I want feedback.
Right. Now, regardless, that's obviously somebody that doesn't know how to give good feedback, and we'll talk about that later.
Yes.
But someone not being able to give good feedback is not an excuse to get defensive.
Right. Yeah. They might not say it right. I mean, when he said, I hate the way you run staff meetings and walk out of the room, that was crappy feedback, right? I mean, it was really not good feedback. That's not a good invitation, as you just said, for me to now get defensive.
Right. Yep. So you stay calm, you ask more questions, and then at lunch you go slit his tires.
Exactly.
Just kidding.
If you're a psychopath.
Okay. Well, so we talked about you need to listen. You need to ask question. What is the next step here?
Well, we
the
have
next component part.
Yeah, we have 5 pieces, and these first 3 kind of go together. These are the first 3 things you're going to do before you start actually addressing what was just said. And this third step is a super simple step, and we call it the I get it statement. This is just some version of some way of communicating that what you just heard, what that person was just saying, got from them to you, right? So you could say, oh, that makes sense. Or you could say, oh, I get what you're saying. Or you could say, oh, hey, I understand. Or you could even be more robust and you could make it into a really good paraphrase. You could say, oh, is this what you're saying? And then you kind of say back what you heard. There's lots of ways to say it, but these 3 things together, right? Listening first without speaking, asking a question or 2, and then, hey, that makes sense. I understand. Or is this what you're saying? That right there is just listening, right? I mean,
Right.
It's a really...
Those are just the listening skills we went over last.
Yeah, a lot of them.
basically.
Yeah.
And by the way, like you said, you're eventually going to have to do something with this feedback. You're not just going to be able to sit there and stare at them like a Dumbo. So this is a little bit more of a cynical reason. But this whole listening, asking questions, giving the I get it statement also buys you a little bit of time, right?
Right.
To figure out what you want to do, how you want to respond to this feedback. So just a little life hack there, folks.
No, I actually want to take a second on that because you've got, somebody gives you feedback and there's this part of us internally that wants to have something to say immediately. And often that's going to be a defensive response or it's going to be a disagreement. So turning this into an open time for that person to share, asking a question, it creates a little bit more dialogue. Like you said, everything that I just described serves this other purpose of giving me some time in the very back of my brain to figure out where I'm going to land with this because I'm going to have to say something.
Right, exactly.
In fact, that's number 4.
Well, yeah. And by the way, I think that's just a very good point. Before you're responding, you're almost, in a sense, are kind of calming yourself down as well before you have to respond. Yep. I mean, if say you have to give a speech in front of a bunch of people, what they tell you is before you go out there, because you're feeling a whole bunch of fear, before you go out there, take like 5 or 6 deep breaths, which actually is just letting your amygdala process. It's the same concept here. You're feeling fear, and before you actually have to go deal with that fear, you're kind of slowing it down.
Yeah, and in fact, let's talk about that. So you're listening, you're not speaking, you're letting the person talk, you're working on your body language at that time so you don't look, defensive. You ask a question, you give some kind of I get it statement. All the time you're doing that, let's harken back to the internal work, right? You're doing the internal work. During that time, you're thinking things like, okay, this doesn't define me, so don't beat myself up. Let's get some distance. Yeah. Oh, wait, I'm also thinking, I wonder which part of this is true. Okay, I'm open to what he's saying.
Might this person know something about me that I'm unaware of? Because again, we don't know what we don't know. And hey, let me make sure I'm just holding back, having some self-control here. I don't need to speak. I don't need to speak yet. Let me ask some questions. Yep. I get it statements as I'm buying myself time.
Listen. Practice.
And remember, even if this just hits the most wretched part of my soul, I have many other wonderful qualities about me.
Wretched part of my soul.
What that even means.
That was poetic and somewhat sad. Wretched part of my soul.
We all have a wretched part of our soul. Don't pretend like you don't.
Speak for yourself, buddy boy.
Right.
All right. So that's good. I see. So you're doing the external and the internal at the same time. That's the art of working through one of these adaptive skills.
Exactly. All right. So you listened really well. They feel heard, right? Now you have to do something with this feedback, right? And there's 3 options now.
Yep. Yeah. So
you have to do something. You can't just sit there and stare at them. Like I said, you have to say something. What do we do? What are the options?
So number 4 is called the choice point, and that's what you're getting at, right? Uh-huh. There's options here. I'm going to be redundant here. Number 1 is listen. Number 2 is ask questions. Number 3 is the I get it statement. Number 4 is the choice point, and there's 3 options. Number 1, agree. I can agree. I can agree with some of it. I can agree with all of it. Good idea about staff meetings. I appreciate that. I think I'll practice that. I'll try that. Mm-hmm. Honey, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings last night when I said that. I apologize. Oh, you're right. I do interrupt a lot. I'm working on that. So if you can find something to agree with, even if it's part of it,
right,
find it.
So even if you disagree with most all of it, but you can find one thing to agree with,
Yeah, within reason. I mean, don't be ridiculous, but yeah, if there's something there that kind of rings true, it's a gift to the other person, and it's actually a gift to the relationship.
Okay.
When you can find that piece.
And again, if we can bring you back to the external or the internal work, I really hope that we are practicing being open in these situations, right? And that's we're going to be more likely to find something that we can agree with.
Yep.
So what's option number 2 of the choice point?
Well, there's 3 options under choice point. Agree is 1. Number 2 is disagree, right? And I got to say this, I guess it's obvious, but I'm going to say it anyways. Disagreeing is not the same thing as being defensive, as long as you keep 2 things in mind. If I'm going to land on disagree, I sure as hell better have done those first 3 things, right? I better have shown you some openness. I'm not interrupted, ask good question. If you experienced me as looking defensive during the first part of this conversation and then I disagree, that's just going to look like defensiveness.
Right.
Even if I'm right.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So if you just don't listen well and you might be right and you disagree, they're going to get defensive. That totally makes sense.
No, you're going to look defensive.
Yeah, you're going to look defensive.
You will look, even if what you're saying is true, you're going to look terribly defensive because you were looking defensive the whole conversation. It also, the second thing about that is if I end up disagreeing, I need to find a way to disagree that doesn't sound defensive.
Right. So they're going to be less likely to take your disagreement as defensive when you've practiced those first, that listening portion.
Well, yeah, but then when you get to the disagreeing itself, right then how you disagree is also really important.
Okay.
The tone of voice I use when I disagree, the wording I choose. Hey, you know what? I appreciate your feedback. I see it this way. That's a pretty non-defensive way of saying it.
Okay.
Right.
We may have to agree to disagree on this one.
Yep. Hey, I appreciate what you're saying, and I can see why you're seeing it the way you're seeing it. Let me share a couple pieces of information that you might not have known about. I mean, there's no guarantee the person's not going to get defensive, or to see you as defensive. There's no guarantee that you're going to show up non-defensively because the other person might be set on you, on seeing you as defensive either way. But if you show up non-defensively with your physical behaviors first, and then you disagree in a way that's gracious and that keeps you guys connected, way less likely the person's going to experience you as being defensive.
Now, is there anything that you really can't disagree with? If someone's giving you feedback on something, I would imagine there are particular things that wouldn't make sense for you to disagree with.
Yeah, there are. It was the employee who said to his manager, you know what, I was really embarrassed when you called me out in the meeting yesterday in front of everybody. And the manager says, oh, no, you shouldn't feel embarrassed by that.
It's like, okay, really?
Really?
Yeah, why don't you tell me what else I should be feeling and shouldn't be
Exactly.
feeling, right?
Yep. You can't disagree with somebody's feelings. You also don't get to disagree with the impact that you have actually had on somebody else, right? So I'm telling you that when you did this or that yesterday, it had this negative impact on me. You can't disagree with that. I own that. That's the impact that you had on me.
Right. So feelings you can't disagree with, impact you can't disagree with, because that's internal and unique to them.
Yep, that's exactly.
There's no disagreement with that. Quick other little point here, when we're talking about phrases that you can use to disagree with people without sounding defensive, if you say something like, I totally respect what you're saying, but I see it differently than that. Okay, when you put the word but in there, psychologically, it just kind of negates everything you said before the but. So I respect what you're saying, but okay, cut out all that. All they're now hearing is, I see it differently than that.
Yeah, it actually makes the first thing you said sound not sincere. I totally hear what you're saying, but I respect what you're saying, but it cancels that out and almost makes the opposite meaning come forth. Yeah.
It seems a little nitpicky, it's a little nuancy, but just one other little thing to remember there.
Yeah, so instead of but, my favorite options are you can say and. Hey, I really appreciate what you're saying, and this is how I'm seeing it. Or you can do full stop, a period.
Just cut out the conjunction altogether.
Yeah. Hey, I totally respect what you're saying. Here's the way I'm looking at it, right? Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
The third option under your choice point, which has saved me many times, is not agreeing or disagreeing, but staying neutral. Just some kind of, hey, that I hear what you're saying. I really appreciate your feedback. Let me spend some time with that. Or I'm not sure what I think of that. Can I have some time to process? Hey, I'm gonna consider what you're saying. You don't. In many cases, you don't actually owe some kind of a yes or no to the person giving you feedback.
However, there clearly are going to be cases where you can't just say, that's really good feedback. Thanks for giving that to me. I'm going to take that. I'm going to chew on. I'm going to think about that.
Yeah. So if I say, Ethan, those proposals that you are doing for me, I really need those within a 5-day turnaround. I can't wait 10 days for those. That's not a time for you to say,
yeah, well, let me think about that and get back to you.
Right. Exactly.
That hasn't worked for me thus far. Now, I'm actually, this one's a little bit confusing for me because you say, okay, you don't always need to come back with a, agree or disagree. I feel like though, when you're in a management type position and someone is saying, you know what, I don't like the way you run meetings. Here's the reason why. Here's what I think you should change and how you should change it. And then you say, that's good feedback. I appreciate it. You're doing everything right. Let me chew on that for a while. And then you just don't get back to them. I feel like you're losing some points there. You should at least get back to them and tell them either, hey, you know what? I'm taking what you're saying. I see it differently, or this is what I'm trying to do, or hey, I took what you said to heart. I'm actually going to make these changes.
I agree. I think in many cases, coming back and completing that feedback loop is great. I really agree with that. Coming back and explaining how the feedback ended up being processed and what you did with it or what you're not going to do with it. I think that's very valid. There's going to be other times where it isn't necessary. It really isn't a thing that you need to loop back. And there's going to be times where you can just say, hey, I really appreciate that. I'll spend some time with that. I've had clients, for example, give me feedback about a class. I'm not going to ever see that person again.
Right.
But in that moment, I didn't have to say, oh, you're right, I will change that. And I didn't have to say, oh, you're wrong, I'm not going to do that. I could just say, which I've done many times, hey, thanks for that feedback, I'm going to process that. And in most cases, I really did. I really did process it. Sometimes it helped me make an adjustment. Sometimes I discarded it. That's my right.
Right. But again, if you are a manager and we're talking about you're receiving feedback from your direct reports, I almost think there's very few situations that you can just sit on it and never follow up, never come back with a, I agree, I disagree, or, you know what, I'm going to let this play out for a while and kind of observe it and see.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's good. Yep.
So you just got to be careful there. Again, this is a pretty good framework, but it's not, this isn't the red letters. There's nuances in here. So you either have agree, disagree, or Stay neutral. Right. And I would say just the last thing in this conversation, and I know this sounds trivial and a small social skill, but this is big. And that's thank you.
Yeah, that's number 5 in our 5 different behaviors that we're going through here.
Just thanking them for their feedback, right? As you always say, thank you is a reward. And dogs, dolphin, and human beings repeat behaviors they get rewarded for.
Yeah, and what you're saying there when I say thank you for that feedback, even if I disagreed with the feedback, right? Even if I didn't fully jump on board, what I'm saying there by saying thank you is several things. I'm saying it's okay to give me feedback. I'm saying you're safe. I'm safe to give feedback to, which means you're safe. You're saying our relationship is healthy enough and elastic enough to handle this. You're saying that I'm the kind of person that wants to be open and wants to grow. So it's actually a really powerful message when you end this conversation with some kind of appreciation or thank you. And what's really cool about this is, yes, end the conversation with this. You can also introduce the thank you anytime in the conversation. I heard this conversation. This was about 2 years ago. I was teaching a class. This was an executive and then his direct reports. And during break, over by the snacks, I happened to be over there getting some coffee.
What kind of snacks?
What kind of snacks?
Yeah.
I have no idea what kind of snacks were there that day 2 years ago.
Sorry.
Does that important?
No. Continue.
All right. So I'm listening to these guys talk, and yes, I was eavesdropping. And the employee said to the executive, "Hey, I wanted to give you some feedback about something you said in there. I didn't agree with what you said." And I was really impressed. The executive turned to that person, looked really open, listened for maybe 30 seconds to what the person was saying. And then when there was an opening, he said, "Hey, before you go on, I just want to say, I really appreciate your willingness to give me this feedback. This really is great." I mean, it was a really powerful message. There's a power differential going on right there. And this person was speaking their truth to power. And this person in leadership was willing to really upfront say, this is safe. This is good.
That's really cool.
Don't feel afraid of this. Yeah, it was really awesome. So that thank you, wherever you place it, is one of the best ways to show that you are not defensive.
Right. And again, thank you is a reward. And it is, I think, fair to point out that on some level, right, you may not want this behavior repeated, right? You may not love receiving, say in this case, negative feedback, but you absolutely want your colleagues and and employees to see that you're safe.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, there are still things you can be thankful for when you disagree with what they're giving you feedback on.
Yeah, when I say thank you, I'm not even saying, necessarily thank you for that specific piece of information.
Thank you is not necessarily agreeing.
No, not at all. No, thank you is, hey, thank you for your openness. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your willingness to want to better this relationship.
Thank you for respecting me enough to give me feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Thank you for caring about me enough to give me feedback, for trusting me enough to give me feedback.
Yeah, and
right?
it's a bonus. It's like frosting on the cake when you can also say, and that feedback you gave me, I'm going to use that. So thank you so much for that.
Okay. So can I just quickly run through what we just talked about with the internal and the external piece with receiving feedback non-defensively?
Please.
Right? So internally, you are working on differentiation. This feedback is only information, but at the same time, you're listening to the feedback with curiosity and openness. This person might know something that I don't know. I need to be open to that. You're working on self-compassion, right? I have many other wonderful qualities about me, and you're working on self-control, just holding yourself back. Don't immediately jump in because your initial reaction is going to be defensiveness. Externally, you're working on just listening, shutting your mouth, blah, 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 look like you're listening. Mm-hmm. You're working on asking questions, right, which will help you get more information. It'll help to show that you're open. And the third was the I get it statement, mm-hmm. right? Just some version of I am hearing what you said, all right? And then you have to land on your choice point, which is option one, you agree with it. If you can find something to agree with it. Number two is disagreeing, which is not the same thing as getting defensive. The third choice point is
stay neutral.
Stay neutral,
yep.
Right? Taking it, thinking about it, chewing on it, and of course, be conscious that in a lot of cases as a manager, you do need to follow up on that. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, thank you. Thank you is a reward, and people repeat behaviors that they're rewarded for.
Yeah, and I want to invite our listeners out there to think about the person they've given feedback to, who's been defensive, who tends to be defensive. Think about how that feels when you're giving that person feedback. How it feels to experience that person's defensiveness. How willing does that make you to want to do it again? How much does that impact the trust in that relationship? Versus thinking about someone you've given feedback to that was truly open, that honored your presence in their life at that moment, that made you feel safe, made you feel honored and respected. It's a difference in not just the way I think about that person, but almost more importantly, how I feel about that person.
My suggestion for everybody is, if you haven't already, write these down, have them somewhere where you're going to review, because sooner or later, and probably sooner, someone is going to come and give you feedback. And that's your opportunity to stay connected in that relationship and start building trust and respect right there.
Good job, man.
Now, actually, I need to give you some feedback about something real quick, if you don't mind.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm feeling actually really open right now. Yeah,
that's
really,
good.
I really am.
That's good, because I don't know how this is going to land.
You're not supposed to do that kind of stuff, Ethan.
Okay.
This is going to be hard.
Okay.
You're not going to like it.
Well, I'll just cut straight to the point. You've been blabbing on way too long, and we need to end this episode.
It's been all on me. You're right. It's all on me.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Anyways, bad example, but that's all we have for you today, folks. Real quickly, I'm going to give you a quick plug here. We have a retreat coming up in November 2019. Mike, go ahead and just tell them a little bit about that retreat, just real briefly, what's kind of going to be covered.
We're going to be doing a retreat in November, and we're going to be working on helping leaders identify their roadblocks to leadership success. We're going to be working on a little bit of mindfulness practice. We're going to be talking about some of the internal mindsets and beliefs that sometimes get in our way. We're going to be spending some time paired up with a partner, working through and practicing some different management skills. It's going to be a deeper dive than what we tend to do in our Managing with Mind and Heart workshops. And it's for people that want to just continue to hone their management skills, to also to know themselves a little better and to be able to recognize what are those things that come up and get in the way sometimes between them and leadership success. It's going to be a great time.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool. And we've been working hard on it. Been a couple years in the making. Also, just want to let everybody know that's listening, if the things that we have been discussing in the last, few episodes really resonate with you, and it's something that you think, this would be great for all our managers to know in our organization, go to our website. We basically bring a 5-day course, and we teach it to all managers within an organization so everybody can be on the same page, singing from the same sheet of music. And when that happens, some really, really cool things happen within your organization.
And then lastly, we really would like to talk about on this podcast what you want us to talk about. So if you have questions, if you have scenarios you want to bounce off us, if you have topics you'd like us to explore, please contact us, specifically contact Ethan. Ethan, your email address?
Ethan at nashconsulting.com, ETHAN at nashconsulting.com. Let us know what we can answer for you, and we would love to do that. Anything else?
No, that was awesome. Thanks, you guys.
All right, folks. Ciao.